So I think that's really fun when I do get to write characters that are sort of steeped in their own cultures or corner of the world or however you want to put it. And I get to see the intersection of that when they meet someone else who's also not worldly and steeped in their own culture, perception, corner of the world, and that meeting point between them, because that to me is a whole lot of fun.
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, onto the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hey bosses, Ella here, Author Like a Boss. Just wanted to give you a little bit of update on some things that are happening right now. First off, the Author Like a Boss giveaway celebration, 1-year celebration, it is still happening. So if you have not entered that giveaway, the way to do so is to leave a review on your platform of choice and then email me at ella@authorlikeaboss.com. letting me know where you left that review. The giveaway is open through the end of April, and I know you guys are really sweethearts out there, and everybody's like, well, I want to give somebody else a chance to win it, but please, I've had one person enter, and I'd really, really love to send somebody a giveaway, and I'd like it to be like a chance. Somebody happened to win because we picked them randomly. So go ahead and enter. Just leave a review and be greedy. You deserve a goodie bag. Okay, so just email me, leave that review, email me. And so that's the first thing. Do it by the end of April. I'm so excited to hear from you guys. The second thing that's happening is I started a Patreon page. So Author Like a Boss now has a Patreon page because I do this podcast completely by myself. It's self-funded, self-scheduled. Everything is paid for by myself. And so I wanted to see, like, if you guys have liked what I'm doing, if you guys want to help support me, maybe covering the cost of the hosting. I know I've said before that podcasting is a lot like writing, where you don't really know how well you're doing until somebody gives you feedback. So you put your content out there, you put your book out there, AKA, or you put your podcast episodes out there, and you don't really know how you're doing until you get some feedback. And so if you're enjoying the Author Like a Boss podcast, I would love if you want to support me. You can join for just $1 a month as a Patreon, and there's different levels, but at the $1 a month, you'll get a shout out on the podcast with your author name, your latest book and genre. $5 a month, you get listed on the authorlikeaboss.com website as a Patreon of the show. And $10 a month, you get a bonus Patreon only Q&A episode. So if you want to check that out, please go to authorlikeaboss.com/Patreon. I appreciate your support. I appreciate you listening, and I can't wait to see what we're going to create together in this coming year of Author Like a Boss. Hello, bosses. Hello, everybody. We are here. Woo-hoo-hoo. Fangirling a little bit today with Elise Kova. So Elise Kova is the USA Today best-selling author of fantasy stories filled with magic and romance. In her past lives, she has graduated from an MBA program, lived in Japan for a bit, and worked for a Fortune 500 technology company. However, she finds herself much happier in her current reincarnation as a full-time author. When not writing, she can usually be found playing video games, drawing, watching anime, or talking with readers on social media. She's happy to call St. Petersburg, Florida, her home, but is always looking forward to her next trip. Her debut series was Air Awakens. Since then, she's penned the dark fantasy The Loom Saga, as well as co-authored paranormal romance The Wish Quartet. Okay, so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love podcasts, actually, so this is so much fun.
Oh, good. Oh, cool. Okay, so just so you know, and I wanted to save this for the air. I was going to tell you.
Bracing myself right now.
So I have an author friend who is also a fangirl, but she's like an author fangirl. She's like, and I was like, okay, I'm talking to Elise tomorrow. Do you have any questions? And her first response is like, her first question was, how is she so awesome?
Stop. it's so weird to me when people are like, I'm fangirling or whatnot, because half the time I'm like, I'm really not someone worth fangirling over. Like, I'm the person who has to remind myself to take a shower when I've been in the writing cave for too long, and will eat ramen noodles for dinner, and basically changes from one pair of yoga pants into the next, and whose closet is now reduced to 3 outfits I wear out. So if you see me out in the wild, you'll probably see that same outfit again and again. Yes, I wash it. I just don't go out that often.
I'm the same way. My husband was like, do you want to wait for me to go to town? Because we live in a rural area. He's like, do you want me to wait until after your interview? And I was like, no, I think I'll stay home. like I have daytime pajamas, and nighttime pajamas is basically like my daytime pajamas are like yoga pants or other comfy pants, and nighttime pajamas, they're definitely distinct. I don't wear nighttime pajamas during the day.
I have
just
pajamas, like, yeah. I just make sure I change, basically. Yeah, but I don't have specific ones. Oh no, I have specific
ones because I'm like, these are daytime. This means I'm working.
I feel like I really should have something like that, and it should probably be a little bit more put together. But at this point, all of the UPS guys and USPS guys, they've seen me in all various states of undress.
Good thing.
I would answer the door actually put together, and they would probably be taken aback and be like, "What happened? What's going on?" You can look like a real human.
Whoa. Okay. So she's real people, you guys, just like us. So now that I've done that, she has other questions, but I'm going to start with my typical question besides the how is she so awesome, and start with my regular. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your author journey?
Yeah. So my author journey was non-traditional, and I think non-traditional is becoming more the normal, is now becoming the tradition, as multiple publishing avenues are opening up, and the stigma is sort of against some of them, like self-publishing or indie publishing, as I prefer to call it. And just so everyone knows, to establish that up front, I like to say indie publishing. The reason being is because I think self-publishing does have a stigma that's a holdover from when self-publishing first got started, and people didn't kind of really understand what it was all about, and it was sort of the Wild West, and there was content that maybe should have had a second pass of editing. But I think, indie music doesn't sort of have that stigma. If you say you're an indie band, for some people, that's actually a good thing.
Or indie films.
Or indie films, exactly. So that's why I like the term personally indie publishing. But just for clarity's sake, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that, when I say indie publishing, I do mean self-publishing. They're synonymous with each other. So I started back in 2012. I had this inkling to write a Thor fan fiction. And I knew myself, and I knew that once I started writing, I would end up with 100,000 words, and I would be really, really upset that I spent all of that time on someone else's intellectual property that I could do nothing with. So I sort of sat on that urge to write for a while, and I was living in Japan at the time, and I just sat on the need to write and listen to a bunch of music. I get a lot of inspiration from music, and Zed's song Clarity had just come out, and it really was an inspirational song for me. And that kind of put the kernel in my mind for Air Awakens. I had this vision of a girl in a magical windstorm thing, a guy trying to get to her. I started asking, why is there love and sanity? Why is it clarity? And Aldrich and Vala were ultimately born of that. And so I started writing on fiction press because I am old and read fan fiction on fanfiction.net back before the time of AO3, young ones. And I was like, there has to be something like this, but for fiction. And I found fiction press, not even knowing Wattpad was a thing. Like, I'm ancient. And so I started publishing a chapter a day. And I published the first couple chapters because I was super passionate about it and really excited. But then people started reading it, because miraculously, if you publish 3,000 to 5,000 words a day, all of a sudden people go, oh, what is this? I want to read it. And so I ended up having a bunch of readers cheering me on. I wrote all 5 books between 2012 and 2013 on Fiction Press, posting a chapter a day. The original drafts totaled, I think when I added it up, just shy of 900,000 words across the 5 books. And I had all of this content, and luckily it was my own content and not someone else's. So when people said, "What's next for this story? Are you going to publish it?" I said, "Oh, well, publishing, how do?" So I reached out to a friend that I went to college with, Michelle Maddow. Go check out her books. She has the Angel Trials that's going on right now. Totally worth checking out, especially if you like kind of urban fantasy. But she at that time had a publishing deal with Harlequin Teen. And I reached out to her and I was like, "Hey, and you've been in this publishing industry since college. What do I do? I have a book. What do I do?" And she was very generous with her time and her knowledge. And I started querying agents in 2014. So I cleaned up my manuscript and then I started querying agents. I had the most abysmal query letter in existence. And it got marginally better as I continued to query, but I had queried 111 agents and got blanket rejections from all of them, or the no reply equals a rejection. So I self-published Air Awakens because I had no stigma with self-publishing. I didn't see it as something that was taboo or bad or lesser, and so I did it. And when book 2 was coming out, I kind of knew that I was onto something, and because it started doing really well, I quit my full-time job 3 or 4 months later. I did the thing that every author tells you not to do, but I did the thing. And I had all 5 books come out within about the span of a year, just over, or just under rather. And the final book was what put me on the USA Today bestseller list at number 89. Since then, I negotiated my first foreign deal with Penguin Kitap in Turkey, which one of the things that I say is if you are trying to get into publishing, there are 2 people who are worth their weight in gold: a good lawyer and a good editor. Then for my next series, The Loom Saga, I worked with a small press called Keymaster, which was my first exploration in traditional publishing. And I learned a whole ton about the publishing industry and how traditional publishing works through that. And I had made that connection with that small press during my indie publishing time. I co-authored The Wish Quartet, as I mentioned. That was another indie publishing venture because that one just felt more right for the indie publishing space. And then ultimately, I signed this past year with Devin Ross at New Leaf Literary, who is now my agent, and I'm now represented by the agency. And she currently has a book for me that's on submission to publishers. So I sit in the hybrid author space and got my agent after I had published, I want to say like 15 or 16 books. So I definitely, I'm a case of there's no right way to publish and there's no one path to getting your book out there or finding success.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what are the benefits for you of going traditional now that you've already done indie?
So for me, one, as you mentioned, I do have an MBA background. And one of the things that I always think about is diversification. And the more that you can diversify your income, the more secure that income is likely to be. And so I like the idea of potentially having a title that is traditionally published because that affords me the comfort of knowing that I am guaranteed my advance for however many years that advance is to be paid over. I have no delusions. More often than not, most authors on most titles will make more if it is successful, or even if they achieve half the amount of success they could in traditional publishing, they'll make more independently publishing because the margins are just better. But for me, it's a bird in the hand play on one level where whatever I get paid for the advance is, I know I have that money coming to me. That's guaranteed to me. Now, granted, because I have found some success on the independent publishing side, I'll be transparent. I am a little pickier on what kind of a deal I would accept on the traditional side, especially selling so much away. But, and that is kind of one nice thing that I didn't have the first time I queried agents or whatnot is I came to the table with nothing. And now I'm coming to the table saying, okay, show me why I need you, which is a nice negotiating place to be in. But that's kind of one reason that's up there. Another reason is that the traditional publishing space, I really feel hits a different market. It's a different demographic. A lot of people who get their books from the traditional publishing world aren't necessarily as active in the indie world. And of course, there's crossover. Of course, there are people who download indie books on their Kindle, none the wiser that it's an indie title. But I think a lot of there is sort of that other side of the Venn diagram that I can't tap into until I get into traditional publishing that I hope will then come over and read some of my other works. Mm-hmm. And then the final thing, again, I'm very forthright. I'm a pretty transparent person. The other thing that really sticks for me is I want to hopefully someday have a chance to get New York Times. What author doesn't want that? Unfortunately, it really can help make a career. And the fact of the matter is that the way the New York Times has structured itself, especially over the past couple of years, it's almost impossible for an indie title to make the list, especially in YA, because I don't think they even have an ebook list anymore for New York Times for YA. They just have hardcover. And there's no way my indie hardcovers would ever make the list. And even if in a week I sold 50,000 copies or some incredible amount, that doesn't guarantee me a spot on the list, because most people don't realize that the New York Times is a curated list. It's not a list of raw sales. And so they could look at a title and say, yeah, this title sold 30,000 more copies, but we're not even going to put it on the list. Then our number one spot.
You know, what's really interesting is because yesterday I was like, oh yeah, I want to reread her book, because I think you were the first, Air Awakens, and it was a few years ago, but I think it was the first indie book, like besides like Tim Ferriss's book, which I think was like the first indie book. I think it was the first fiction indie book that I read was Air Awakens.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was like, yeah, it'd been doing well or something. And I was like, oh yeah, this looks good. And read it and really enjoyed it. And then yesterday I was like, okay, because I haven't finished the series. And I remember really loving the first few books. And I was like, what is the difference between like Elise and Air Awakens in this series and like Patricia Briggs, who I have Patricia Briggs like at the top of my mind as one of my top favorite authors. like what was the difference? And I'm like, I think it's the physical copy of the book. Mm-hmm. Like, I think having the physical copies of the books keeps the name fresh. It became more real because I had a physical copy.
Yeah, and I mean, I have paperbacks and hardcovers available of all of my titles, yes, except for the Wish Quartet. I don't have hardcovers at that one, but it isn't the same distribution channels. Mm-hmm. It isn't the same visibility. And then the other unfortunate fact is that indie hardcovers and paperbacks, physical books cost more because we don't have economies of scale behind us. Mm-hmm. So we aren't having a print run of 5,000, 10,000, however many thousands of copies where a publisher is going to a printer and saying, hey, print me 8,000 copies of this book. And the printer can say, oh, because you're buying that much paper, that much ink, that much cover material, mm-hmm, whatever else, we can lower the price for you. Mm-hmm. And indie authors with print on demand, we pay per book to get that printed. And we don't have the benefit of that distribution and economies of scale. And so they're harder to get and they're more expensive to buy. So I get why people don't buy them, but that's a really interesting point that you bring up about the fact that it is somewhat less tangible when it's on your Kindle or whatnot. Because
I was like, why didn't I finish this? And I think listen, I am all for indie publishing. Like, I love it so much. I love that you can reach out to your potential readers and there's no middle person. I just love it, everything about it. But I was thinking about this specifically because I was going to be chatting with you, and I was like, what is the difference? Because she could be at the top of my like favorite authors list, and I have, my favorites that are like, when people ask you like, who are your favorites? Yeah. And you like a list, and it's never just one. Like, who's your favorite? It's like, I have like 15. But
yeah, that's like asking me which leg I like more, left, yes, or right. Both.
But I was like, what's the difference between this author and these other authors? And I think it's because the way my memory works is like, I've picked up their books, I've held them, versus not having held yours because I read it digitally, which I still love. It's just an interesting thing that I'm noticing.
Don't worry, I'm not taking any offense right now.
Yeah, okay. I said she wouldn't, and that's why I said it. Some authors I might not have like been like, I forgot about your series.
It takes a lot to offend me. And I know that not every book is for every person. So even if you said, hey, I read your series and it wasn't for me, I'd be like, oh, I'm sorry. I hope you found better books after.
No, I reread Air Awakens last night and I was up until 2 a.m. until I finished it. Then, because I was like, this is so good. I forgot. I really do love this book. And now let me look at my phone real quick. See how far I am through the second book, which I started this morning before we talked. 66% done with the second book in the series. So
well, the good thing is that the main series is complete, so you can binge all the way to the end.
Yes. Okay. So enough about me and my like tangentness and fangirlingness and like, oh yeah, because I have a couple of other questions from the same author.
Yeah.
The same author who's like, I was like, what should I ask her? And she did come up with some other questions besides how is she so awesome? It took her a little while to come up with them. I think she was like, what do I say? Which is so cute. She wants to know, and I am also curious, as I've just finished reading the first book and I'm working through the second. What is your world building process? Because the worlds that you have in, at least in this series, like they're really elaborate and you just said that you wrote a chapter a day. So like, how did that work? The world building and the chapter a day? Like what was, tell us more.
So for Air Awakens, I pantsed that series because I went in and I just knew I wanted to write about these characters and I would see what happened to them along the way. And as I mentioned, I wrote around 90,000 words in the original draft. Mm-hmm. The published versions are just shy of 400,000 words. No, just over, excuse me, just shy of 500,000. And really, it's one of those things where I cut a book from each book, basically, is one way to look at it in the editorial process, because I didn't know the world and I was finding it as I was going. I was discovering the world, and there were thread lines that didn't match, or plot lines that didn't match up. There were threads of foreshadowing that just went unanswered. There were nuances in the world that made no sense, that had no basis in any kind of logic. And so for Air Awakens, that world was one that happened very organically through the original drafting process, and then a lot more, I suppose I would say intelligently, though that sounds arrogant. But I applied real thought to it as I was editing of what does this need to sound like and look like and actually make notes and make sure I kept my facts straight and really flesh out, okay, if the West has this fashion and the East has this fashion, is there a reason for it? Or how did it evolve through the years? Or why is it like that? Because I love studying cultures just in real life. I love learning about other places and locations. And I love the fact that there are things that just happen organically in society, but I always look at culture in society as nothing really happens in a true vacuum. Mm-hmm. Even the things that sort of pop up out of nowhere, there are events surrounding it that created a space for that thing to exist and made sense for it to exist in that time and place. And so I really find that fascinating. And that's one of the things that I get very passionate about in world building. For my other series and more for Air Awakens, as I was editing, I actually spend about a year, if not more, world building. So I have a series right now that I don't think I'll start writing until spring of 2020 at the earliest. And I've been working on the world building and building notes since last year for it. So I kind of constantly have this round robin of, it's not I'm writing one series and then when that's done, I start the next one. It's I have different worlds and manuscripts at different stages in the process, all at different times, and approach it kind of in this way of trying to think about those organic aspects of how culture is born.
I think that is amazing. And I'm also fascinated by that nothing happens in a vacuum, because I'm like, there's people that we consider evil, but there was a context. They got into power within a context. And when you know the context, you're like, the different people still had to make the decisions that they're making, but they make more sense.
Yeah.
When you look at the context, which is like, but how can it make sense? Surely there's a specific right and a specific wrong. And it's like, we could go off on this tangent of philosophizing because I love this kind of stuff, but it's like, look at Regina in Once Upon a Time. So let's get concrete about this. Have you ever watched Once Upon a Time?
I was about to warn you that I haven't.
Okay. Regina is the Wicked Witch. Okay. She's the evil.
Okay.
She's the evil queen. Okay. No, she's the evil queen, not the Wicked Witch. She's the evil queen. And you're like, oh, evil queen. But then as the series goes on, you realize that she has a whole story behind it. And it's one of the best shows that I've seen that gives you the perspective for why the villains are who they are and how the heroes aren't necessarily perfect. And so which I think speaks to context.
Yeah. And it was one thing that I really enjoyed doing actually in my Loom saga, because I had the opportunity in that series where every book, it's a split point of view chapter story. So every chapter has a dedicated point of view from a different character. And every book in that trilogy has one dedicated point of view from one of the villains. So you get to kind of see how they are the heroes of their own stories and why they do what they do.
Mm-hmm. And how do you come up with these characters how do you marry the characters to the worlds as you're writing?
Ooh. Well, it goes a bit both ways. In that sometimes I have a character in my head and I really want to write that character. And then I kind of have to go back and say, wait a second, how do they fit into this world? Where do they fit? And if they don't really quite fit nicely, what's the reason for that? Because there are people who don't fit nicely into, and I would honestly argue most people who don't fit nicely into the quote unquote normal standard bubble, but there's a reason for it. So I kind of look at, what if you have, I'm trying to think of a really good example. I'll go back to Loom again. Mm-hmm. In Loom, the dragon society, so there's two worlds in that story, and the dragons have basically oppressed the world below them, Loom. And the dragons have a very hierarchical society, a very familial based society, and a society that is centered around those two main factors. Whereas Loom doesn't have the concept of family. They don't have the notion really of this sort of strict hierarchy between them. And when the dragons first go to Loom, they look at Loom and their first thought is, how are you existing right now? You make no sense. You have no structure to your society. Meanwhile, Loom is looking at them going, why do you care about all of this superfluous shiznat that doesn't matter? And so I think that's really fun when I do get to write characters that are sort of steeped in their own cultures or corner of the world or however you want to put it. And I get to see the intersection of that when they meet someone else who's also not worldly and steeped in their own culture, perception, corner of the world, and that meeting point between them, because that to me is a whole lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. It's so cool. Okay. I'm going to go read that series because I really
it's dark. That's my only warning, is that it's definitely, it's overall hopeful, but it's dark and bloody.
Good. Because I am like a very bubbly personality, but when I go to read, I like dark. And I think there's like a lot of people, it's definitely a trend of people who are really liking dark fiction.
Yeah, I sort of started that one. It was born of the concept of what happens if the hero is on the hero's journey and then fails, they fall off. What happens to that hero? And that's where Loom starts.
Whoa. See, now Did that come first, or did that question come first, or was it the world?
They were a bit succinct with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that. So Loom is classified as gas lamp, which is it's steampunk gas lamp. And the difference between the two is steampunk trends more to the sci-fi mechanical that is rooted in science, whereas gas lamp has mechanical that is rooted in magic. Is kind of an oversimplified way to put it. Okay. I'm sure there's someone listening who's going, no. Excuse me. But that's my oversimplification. So the world of Loom, as I mentioned, is steeped in mechanics, and there's engineers, and the dragons are magical creatures. And so when the two worlds intersect, the people on Loom discover a way to harvest dragon magic and ultimately create gold, basically, where the dragon's magic can't manipulate the physical world, but then the people on Loom suddenly go, we can make gold, and that is our thing. And I've totally got off on a tangent and forgot where I was going with this. So my question sorry.
My question was, I know this danger of when you're talking to authors and they start talking about their books, and it's like,
I know, it's so bad. I'm so sorry. Don't worry. I'm so sorry. No. I warned you about that.
I absolutely expect that.
Your listeners, I warned her about this.
She did. I was asking about world came first, the world or the. Mm-hmm.
So I knew I wanted to write in this gas lampy, steampunky kind of world, and I wanted to have that intersection of magic meets technology. But at the same time, I also kind of had that other idea of story structure of what it would be really cool if I had this hero's journey, because Air Awakens is definitely a hero's journey story. I don't think that's a spoiler to share or anything like that, but it's very much a farm girl who's the library apprentice becomes the one who can save the kingdom, more or less. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that, and I sort of wanted to not write that again. And I was like, okay, what happens if I do this? So the world was happening concurrently in my head with this want to write that kind of story. And they just ended up marrying really well, because I knew that the world that I was building was very dark, and it needed a story that, like I said, ultimately is hopeful, but isn't at the same time, it's not your traditional hero's journey that's sort of uplifting throughout.
Okay. Interesting. It makes me, I'm like going back to something you said, my own tangent. Because I was thinking about how you're saying different cultures, like they know, people know their own culture, and you have this in this world where they're all mechanical down here and the dragons are all magical up there. But I love it. I went to Thailand. Okay. What that brings up is I went to Thailand quite a few years ago at this point. But if you've ever been to Bangkok, they have like the roads, they don't have any streetlights.
I've heard this. I haven't been myself, but I've heard this.
They don't have any streetlights. So the main roads are all like, and they're big. They're like highway roads, sides roads. They're like 4 or 5 lanes on each side. And then they have a concrete divider in the middle. And then when there's a space to turn, the concrete divider has a break. But there's no lights. There's no stoplights or any kind of anything. And you just have all these people who are driving, like bumper to bumper driving. And then they kind of just need to turn left across the other lane. And everybody just kind of
figures it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about that and how very, very different it is. And there's not that, I mean, there's accidents, sure, but it was surprisingly not as many as you would think, because it's just a different way of driving.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating. And I think about that all the time because I'm like, it's so different. Like, it's such a concrete example of how different it is, which has nothing to do with writing these books. But you did make me think of that. And so I had to share it.
I appreciate that. As someone who loves to travel, like I said, I love hearing about different places and cultures and things. And I'm always like, ooh, how can I use that in a book?
Yeah. It was, I'm like, what? Because you think, oh yeah, cultures are different and you have this abstract idea of it. But when you actually experience it yourself and I
think that's something that I've been really fortunate to get to play with in Air Awakens. So the Air Awakens world, it started with that original series, which was my debut, the Air Awakens series. Then I went back and I wrote a trilogy prequel called the Golden Guard trilogy that is sort of origin stories for characters in the Air Awakens world. And you can pick those up in any order. You can pick them up before or after you read the original series. But now I'm writing Vortex Chronicles, which takes place about 18 years after the end of Air Awakens, and it starts with Vortex Visions. And similarly, you can start with Vortex Visions, or you can read the original series first. You can go either or. But it expands the world a lot. And for me as an author, it's really exciting that I get to take these readers who see the Air Awakens world as normal, and I get to turn that perception on its head using using a character and seeing it through their eyes, who also sees the world that you see in Air Awakens as normal. And then when their world expands, they have to confront that fact of what they have thought is normal is just a perception and not any kind of absolute truth.
Oh my gosh, this is why my author buddy has an author crush on you. This right here. because it's more than a story. It's more than a story. I sound like, I don't know if anybody watched So You Think You Could Dance, but there's one season a long time ago, and one of the guys was like, because it's more than just dancing. And that's what I feel like I'm saying right now. It's like, it's more than just a story.
Well, I know it is for me, so it's really good to hear someone else say that, because to me, all these people and worlds are real.
Yeah. So, and you're leading on to the next questions that I wanted to ask you. So,
yes.
Vortex Visions. Is it Vortex Visions? Shoot.
Yes. Vortex Visions.
Okay,
that's
good.
book 1, and the series name is Vortex Chronicles.
There we go. Okay, so that just came out. This is just coming out pretty recently.
Came out February 4th of this year.
Which, you guys, as of this time, is maybe 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago. So pretty recently.
Yeah, about that.
Pretty recently. So what? I'm going to shift from writing into marketing. Obviously, with Air Awakens, you had written it on this fiction website, and then you released it pretty quickly because you had all of them done, which we now know, which you maybe didn't know, but we all now know is a great way of releasing. All 5 books in 1 year.
My logic at the time was I knew that I could set up a pre-order for 90 days. And my logic was I always wanted the next book in the series available for pre-order when the prior book came out. Mm-hmm. And that was what defined my release schedule. Yeah.
And it just turns out that that's one of the things that Amazon really likes, is having books released regularly in in a shorter periods of time. So with this series that's just come out or starting to come out, what has your marketing strategy been, and how is it different or the same as what you've done previously?
So it's a little bit different because with Air Awakens, obviously that was my debut. So I was very much like, I have a book, someone read it, please. Okay, thanks. I promise it doesn't suck. I worked really hard. Whereas now I have more resources at my disposal. I have a newsletter I've been working on for goodness now like 4 years. Mm-hmm. I have a newsletter. I have a social media presence. I'm not figuring out how Instagram like I understand a little bit more, and I'm not saying I could write the book on Instagram, but I at least sort of understand it a bit more, having been at this for a while. So I do have more resources at my disposal. But the one big thing that the one big thing that is fundamentally the same as when I first was getting out Air Awakens and even now is I fundamentally believe in word of mouth, whether that's person to person, in person, or whether that is digital, either messaging online or in reader communities or just screaming into the void on Twitter. I believe in the power of someone who is not me saying this is a good book to read it. And of course, that fundamentally starts with writing a book that someone will want to say that about. But since we're talking about marketing, I have always placed a really high focus on looking for influencers, looking for people with followings, big or small, who can become advocates for my work, who want to become advocates for my work, and who want to hold it up in a YouTube video and say, hey, check out this book. And so that's one thing that I would say has really stuck with me throughout my publication process. The other big thing that I do now that I didn't do, so that was one thing that was the same, one thing that's different, is I have ads now. And I understand them to a point. I think most authors are like, I understand how my Facebook and AMS ads work, up to the point where there's, unicorn and fairy dust involved on the mysterious back end of websites. But I have the budget, and I also have the ability and knowledge to run ads. So I do run ads now, and that's kind of been the other big difference between past releases.
Okay. Question about influencers. How did you decide who they were? And then how did you approach them? Like what did you do? Or what do you do?
Yeah, so I don't think I do anything that's really that special. I like to treat other people as humans who have wants and needs. They are not just megaphones that I can pick up and scream at to scream for me. One of the first things I started doing, take Instagram, for example. I'll go through popular hashtags, hashtag Bookstagram, hashtag Instabook, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I'll look for people who I may want to reach out to. And this is kind of a cold reach out. So, which sounds terrible now that I said it out loud. Anyways.
Yeah. It's marketing lingo, you guys.
Yeah. So I'll go and I'll look for people whose posts are getting good traction, and I'll look for people who maybe have a couple hundred likes on a picture. And part of my reason for that, and as I explain to my readers too, who will request a copy of my book for review or for an ARC or for promotion, and I have to refuse them, unfortunately, sometimes. As much as I would love to send out books to everyone, I can't. And I have to justify the cost of sending out a physical copy, because Instagram loves physical copies, the cost of sending out a physical copy to how many followers they have that could potentially convert to sales. So the way I look at it is I look for an account that has some traction on their posts. And I have a 10 to 15% rule in my head where if you have 10,000 followers, I want to see a total of 1,000 people liking each photo you post on average. Because that to me shows that you've curated an audience who trusts you and who engages with you. So I that's one of the things I look at. Of course, I also factor in comments. And that's also a way that I look at and kind of filter people who maybe were very active and then changed their MO, or were inactive and now their follower base isn't as dedicated, or potentially even bot followers, and they have 15,000 followers, but for some reason only 12 people like their pictures, regardless of how beautiful they are. Mm-hmm. To me, there's something amiss there. There's a disconnect. So let's say I find someone, they have good engagement, they have a good follower count. The other thing that I usually think of is I say 5% conversion, which is still a pretty good conversion rate. But if 5% of their followers were to go out and buy my book, what would that look like for me? What do I gain monetarily for that? What's my bottom line? And that's part of how I weigh in those decisions. So let's say I have someone who kind of checks all the boxes. First thing I do is I look and I see if they have a website or a description in their Instagram sort of bio about how they want to be reached out to, because shocking, but people will oftentimes put how to get in contact with them and what type of contact they will and will not accept. So I look for that, and I look to see, because a lot of people will have that, and a lot of people will say, I'm currently closed to any kind of marketing, or I only accept books for review if they are traditional, or I only accept books for review if they are contemporary romance, or whatever the case may be. And if you're an author who's trying to do this, pay attention to those things.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ignore them. Don't be that person who goes, I know your entire feed is dedicated to contemporary romance, but you do have 25,000 followers. So would you feature my epic fantasy book? Chances are they're going to say no, number one. And number two, you don't really want that anyway, because they've curated a market for one thing. They know their market, and trust them to know it. So I will reach out in whatever way that they prefer. If I can't find anything, I'll send a message, and I'll usually apologize and be like, hey, I couldn't find any other way to contact you. I hope you don't mind me messaging you like this. And it'll just be sort of like a cold call where I'll say, I think you have a great feed. I really like how you're doing whatever I really like how they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a book that I think you may be interested in. I would love to send you a copy if you would be willing to just feature it in a photo. You don't have to review it unless you want to, but all I ask is that be honest. If you've read the book and say it's good, then cool, but don't say it's good and act like you've read it if you haven't, which most people don't do, but I like to just put up front that I'm not asking for anything shady. Mm-hmm. And I message them, and most of the time people are pretty receptive.
Yeah. That's I think for a lot of people who haven't done it before, who haven't reached out like that, I'm like, people are pretty receptive. Like, the worst that happens is they're like, no, thanks.
Yeah. If you do it politely, you're not offensive, you're not pushy, you're not rude, and you're not doing something that they've said, please don't do this thing. As you said, worst case scenario is they just go, no, I'm sorry. And you're like, okay, no worries. Have a great life. Like,
yeah. I mean, how do you think I got Elise Kova on this podcast, you guys? She did not reach out to me. Like I reach out to authors all the time, and I'm like, hey, because I'll read their book, love it, and then be like, I want to talk to that person in real life.
Yeah.
And sometimes people come back to me and they're like, I'm sorry, I'm on a deadline and I can't, or I'm not interested right now or something. And I'm like, okay, great. Loved your book.
Yeah.
Keep writing new ones.
It's business. Don't take it personally and go on with your life.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's not as hard as I think people sort of feel like it is. But I will say again, just be sensible and just look at it as, if this person promotes my book, what's the best return I could get? What's the worst return I could get? And those are estimated numbers. But if those estimated numbers are cutting it close or coming in under, then it's probably not a good opportunity for you to pursue. If they're coming in over in the worst case scenario, then do the thing.
Yeah. And you guys, please remember that Elise has like a background in marketing. So this is not just like she's like, I'm an indie author and I knew this immediately from the time that I decided to publish to now. This is, don't compare where you're at to Elise.
Well, and quite frankly, don't compare where you're at to anyone else. Yes. Everyone is at their own stage in the journey, and they're on their own path, and it's not an apples to apples comparison between any two authors. So, and honestly, this is something else that stuck with me. I think it was Victoria Schwab who tweeted, I'm paraphrasing her tweet, and she might have been quoting someone else, but it was effectively, don't compare your rehearsal to someone else's on stage performance. Mm-hmm. And it was something that sort of stuck with me of we put everyone sees the success. Everyone sees everything working out. They don't see the man or woman behind the curtain frantically trying to keep their head above water with duct tape and prayers.
I think that's why people really like this podcast and various podcasts and hearing authors' stories, because you're like, 111 rejections.
Oh,
that's like, because it's like, oh, yes, Elise Kova is a superstar now, but she did have 111 rejections, and she did have to edit a full book out of each of her books.
Yeah. And before I got my agent this last year, I had one agency that I really wanted to work with. Fortunately, it was New Leaf, but there was another agency that I was like, I don't know, I'm going back and forth. And one of my other author friends was like, query both of them, because you'll regret it if you don't. You'll regret it if you only query one agency and you get that agency. They'll always be the what if. So I queried them and I got rejected last year. It still happens. Rejection is standard in the industry.
What? See? You're making people feel better right now. No, it's not personal. I had somebody I talked to who said, when traditional publishers reject you, it's not necessarily because you're not marketable. It's because they can't necessarily market you to their audience.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't mean,
or they have another title that's too similar and they don't want to cannibalize their readership. There's a ton of reasons.
Yes. Yep. Or in that moment, right? Maybe you're not marketable in that moment. Maybe you're not marketable. Like there's all these different reasons. It's not personal, which is like, that's okay then. Good. Phew. So, so can you tell us a little bit about an obstacle or challenge you faced and how you overcame it?
Ooh, kind of along that same vein, I would say the first big one was just not thinking my books were trash just because agents didn't want them. And that was sort of a big hurdle for me. I remember the day that I sort of had that agent who requested a partial and then requested a full. And I was like, this is it. This is the agent. I have a good feeling. And then they sent me the rejection letter and I just collapsed on the kitchen floor crying and I had a real good cry. And that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I have two choices, because it was getting to that point where I'm like, it's very possible that no one will want to sign with me. And I said, I have two choices. I can trunk this manuscript and either write more in the future or just say that was a fun period of my life and now that chapter's come to a close, or I can publish it myself. And it was that question of, is this good enough to go forward with? And I ultimately reached the conclusion of yes. And I'm really glad I did.
Yes, we are too.
But yeah, just that sort of undenying kind of faith in my work and in my ability to move forward despite rejection or bad reviews or any other setbacks. But I will give it the caveat of sometimes the work is bad and needs to be edited. Find an editor you trust who is worth their weight in gold. Mm-hmm. Call back. But there is a point that no one, no matter what publishing path you follow, no one will care about your book more than you. No one will. No publisher, no agent, no reader. No one will care about it more than you. No one will go to bat for it more times than you. No one will work harder on it than you. And so if you are not prepared to give 110% to it, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. And that's really sort of the mentality that I kind of got my head around.
I feel like there's a mic drop in there. And done. And
scene. Yes. I mean, I still have time if you want to keep chatting, or we can just, right there.
I'm just like, bam. Like if that didn't hit you in the gut, you guys, like it did me. Whew. Okay. So, so what is your best advice? What's your best advice for people who, in fact, I kind of want to touch on this, like the best advice for people to be able to put that 110% in, because that's when I talk with new authors, the biggest challenge is the commitment, not the actions. Like it's not that doing the writing yes, it can be difficult, right? But we know what it is. We know how to do it. Doing the marketing, same thing.
You can learn it.
Yeah, you can learn it. It's like we all know how to post on Facebook. We all know how to post on Twitter. There's the how to do it intelligently, but it's the mindset behind. It's the getting to that commitment. And it's such a nebulous thing to ask people because I'm like, what? Well, what was that? Like, how did you get that?
So I can give the answer for me, and then I can kind of lead into a more general thing that's another big thing that I encourage a lot of authors to do. So for me, it was, as you mentioned, I have an MBA, I have a business background. And I wanted to approach publishing like a business. I viewed it as I am starting my own company. Now my company is me, and it's to publish my books, but I wanted to have that almost sort of little bit of divorce of the emotions and look at it from a business perspective and approach it like a business. And the big thing that kind of helped me with that and soothed me was I reminded myself that most small businesses fail. Most small businesses do not make it off the ground the first time they hit the runway. And I sort of had that soothing mantra in the back of my head of failure doesn't mean the end, because most entrepreneurs fail a couple times before they find their success. And there was that. And then there was the other mantra of most businesses have to go in the red before they get in the black. They have to lose money before they make money. Now, yes, there is a point where you have to say, this is hemorrhaging and I have to cut my losses, and you need to know where that point is. And I definitely had it in my head setting out, but I went into it not saying this is how much money I want to make. I went into it saying this is how much money I can stand to lose. And both of those mentalities, I think, really sort of helped me pay for marketing when it might have been a little bit more painful because I didn't have any return on my books, or go into it saying I'm going to take a risk on this, and if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world, and not go into it purely from the perspective of this book is my baby and I love it and I just want the best for it, which is true. But having that, for me personally, having a little bit of that emotional distance where I started looking at it more like a business and a product than this is my baby, definitely helped me. And that I think leads into sort of my big thing that I tell authors is define success and what success is for you. And there's no right answer to it. So for me, success was I went into it and I said, I would like this to replace my job, or at the very least, I would like this to be something that I make a good income on. That was my goal. And I went into it trying to take the actions that would get me to that goal. And so it's something that I encourage other authors to think about, because if your goal is to make money, that will guide your actions, and that will guide what you need to put aside and focus on. If you want to win awards, that's a different path. If you just want to be published, to say that you published and finished a book, and you don't care if it's just your mom and your cat are the only two people who read it, then awesome. That also is success. There's no wrong answer here, but I think to find that 110% to give, you first need to know what you're giving it toward. And once you can get behind that, then it's a lot easier to go all in on it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And is that your best advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so, because I think, because there are authors I talk to who are like, yeah, I want to make money, but at the end of the day, I'm really focused on the craft, and that's what I'm really passionate about, and that's really what I want to focus on. And not to say authors who focus on the craft don't care about the money, or authors who focus on the money don't care about the craft. It's not a zero-sum thing, but it does kind of help you guide yourself of whose advice do you listen to, because an author who's focused purely on awards or accolades isn't going to spend as much time learning about the marketing. Probably. Right. Putting a lot of asterisks here.
and even then, as an individual, it can shift where you put your attention and focus. It's like, if you're focused on the craft, we all have so many hours in the day and so much energy that we can output. So knowing where you want to go can help decision making when you're like, okay, I've got these many different options of things I can do. Where do I want to put my attention?
Yeah. And it also can help you stay on track, because you do have that moment where you have to stop and say, if I want to make this, if I want to spend 10 hours on editing this book right now, do I really have these 2 hours that I am getting lost in a group chat on Facebook ads. Like, maybe you do, probably not.
Oh, we didn't even get into Facebook ads, which are so much fun. But I think the Facebook ads, so much fun. But I think the influencers that was powerful stuff. So, okay. So can you tell us about your latest book? Well, we talked about it a little bit, but tell us more. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Yeah, for sure.
Where people can find you and it.
So just to do a quick recap, the latest book that I have out is Vortex Visions. It's the first book in Vortex Chronicles, which is set in the Air Awakens world. You can start with Vortex Visions, or you can start with Air Awakens, or you could start at the very beginning chronologically and start with The Crown's Dog. Lots of options. Pick the one that sounds the best to you. It is a young adult. I say older young adult because it is an epic fantasy. So there is, bloodshed and fighting and whatnot, but it is a young adult book, and it tells the story of Vi, who is the crown princess of this world, and she was traded away before her birth to basically be a political pawn. And she was supposed to be reunited with her family, but has yet to be reunited. And she begins to wonder if it's because perhaps of her magic. And she finds out ultimately that it is, but not in the way she was expecting. And when she is troubled with visions of the end of the world, and a mysterious sorcerer captive traveler from the other side of the world. Yes, trust me, all of that makes sense. She realizes that her destiny may be far greater, but to achieve it, she may have to give up everything that she thought was important to her, including her throne. And so that's kind of where it begins.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. And there, you guys, is how to write a blurb.
Yes!
How to hook people.
I really appreciate that because I'm still working on my pitch for that book. So it's more clumsy than I would like for some of my other books.
Yeah.
Or in comparison to some of my other books.
And you guys, I do recommend looking at the blurbs for Air Awakens and her other books, because when I was re-downloading it last night or yesterday, I was like, librarian, she is so smart. I was like, every woman, every young girl, every person like me who's reading about the librarian girl is like, I always wanted to work in a library. My first jobs I applied to were like, can I work at Borders, please? And I identify with her already because just the character that she is, and because everybody who's reading this book is a reader who loves books.
It's true. I do get that. I do get that a lot. And I'm like, that wasn't intentional, but I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention where
you focus on it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I forgot to mention. No, you're good. You're good. I was the one who left the window open because I totally forgot to mention where you could find the book.
Yes.
Everything. I have links to everything. All of my backlist at elisekova.com. So just my name.com. But I'm on Amazon. I am in Kindle Unlimited. So yay, if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, you can pretty much read everything in my library. If you do not have a Kindle, however, what I do is if you purchase on Amazon, you can forward me proof of purchase to elise.kova.author@gmail.com. And you can send your proof of purchase, like say you have a Kobo, and I will send you through BookFunnel a personalized read anywhere link so you can get it on your Kobo. So that's my compromise, because I don't like excluding people. But I am on Amazon. You can follow me on there. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. But yeah, if you go to elisekova.com, my social media links are up in the right-hand corner, and just feel free to explore and say hi to me on Twitter or something.
Instagram. I'm instantly going to go follow you on Instagram and everywhere else. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm like, okay, Elise Kova. And Elise, you guys, is spelled ELISEKOVA.
Yes.
Just
that is it. That is a name with lots of spellings.
Yes. Yes, it is. ELISEKOVA. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I feel like we need to do a part 2 because, as you said, we didn't even get to Facebook. I just rambled about gaslamp fantasy. I'm so sorry.
No. I'm like, these are the most fun interviews for me because I'm like, who knows where we're going to go? And we still got a bunch of really good stuff. And I really appreciate you sharing, like being so transparent with things. I think people get a lot of value from that.
Oh, of course.
And everybody, thank you for listening. Hope you had as much fun as I did. Hugs and happy authoring here at Author Like a Boss. Hey boss, you made it to the end of the episode. You're the best. Because of that, I'm going to give you a special invitation to find out more about the Author Boss Academy, where I and a bunch of really awesome authors hang out, have fun, and get stuff done. If you end up joining, tell me the secret word and you'll get a special bonus. Find out more about the Academy at authorlikeaboss.com/academy. The secret word is nipples. Hugs and happy authoring. I hope to see you soon.
If you love the Author Like a Boss podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes. Until next time.